Racism, as I understand it, is a global system for the genetic survival of the global white minority population. We usually don't think of whites as being a minority, but they're a tiny minority, fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet, and they are genetic recessive, meaning that if a black person and a white person mix, the president, Barack Obama, you get a colored person. So if you want to maintain an oppressive process on a group of people, you certainly don't inform them of the depths and details of their history. Just like you don't give them adequate education, you don't maintain adequate housing, etc. Every morning that a black person turns on the television, they are getting their dose and indoctrination with white supremacy. You see, so if you turn on the TV or pick up a newspaper, look at a magazine, unless you understand the system, then you have a grid to put things in their proper perspective. But without that, you are constantly and continuously being indoctrinated by the system itself. You see, but the very fact that people who classify themselves as white would find themselves saying, something's wrong with your genetics, something's wrong with your genetics. In psychiatry, we call that projection. In other words, if I have to keep focusing on your genetics, I must have some doubt about my genetics, and we have the basis for that. Meaning, the ability to produce melanin pigment or skin color is a genetically dominant trait.
The issue with black people is this: we hate who we are and love who we can be. We hate who we are, Africans, and love who we can be, Europeans. We do not want anybody to remind us of who we are, which is why we shun Africa. We are trying to get out of who we are, and we think that if we act white enough and marry white enough and dye our hair white enough, then maybe white folks will start treating us like white folks. You are an African. White people have never forgotten it, no matter how much you try to, and you will always be treated like an African. It doesn't matter how many doctors you got. It doesn't matter how light you are. It doesn't matter if your wife is white. You can ask Tiger Woods about that. You will still be treated like a black person.
And even today, if they don't sanction what you do and authenticate it, then it is considered non-valid. And that's unfortunate, because that's not true, and we can't allow that to be true. And it was the same as with my work and a lot of other people out here. If you have not attended their school and learned their method, whatever they say it is, they have no respect for independent study, when they used to be proud of in America the self-made man, the self-made woman. That used to be it, until it got out of hand and we started creating so many things,
William Shockley, who I debated about black genetic inferiority, he was a Nobel Prize laureate. He was one of the inventors of the transistors, a professor at Stanford University. Now, he could teach and talk about black genetic inferiority as long as he wanted, but a black person cannot talk about why racism exists and continue to teach at a university level. George Wallace found out. He said that's Governor George Wallace. Yes. He said when he first went into politics in the South, in Alabama, he thought that poor whites, if they would join with blacks, they would have a great deal of political power. You see, and so that coming together of the poor whites and the poor blacks. And he said he soon realized that whites did not care if they didn't have roads, if they didn't have hospitals, if they didn't have schools. They just wanted to know that they were better than the blacks. Now, I say that reasoning comes because the deeper concern was genetic annihilation. You see, in other words, if the poor blacks and poor whites came together and they were working together and functioning together, and then they would pretty soon intermix sexually together, then the end result would be white genetic annihilation.
Racism definitely took a toll on black male-female relationships, especially in the 1960s, because in the 1960s, black men and black women, they were doing what they were supposed to have done for a long time, which was fight together against white supremacy, against racism. And they were doing this with the civil rights movement. So what happened, people had to come in and infiltrate and have a divide and conquer strategy between black men and black women. In 1964, government came in and they pulled black women to the side, and they started to classify black women and women in general as minorities. In 1964, that's the first time they classified women as minorities. So they started to give them set-asides and benefits, and then they created the feminist movement, and a lot of sisters branched off into that, and that kind of created a rift because a lot of sisters stopped fighting for civil rights and they started to fight for women's rights, but women's rights weren't being jeopardized in the black community. Our first priority was racism, and we should have dealt with that first.
We wanted to be free. We didn't need any boundaries, need no man to tell us what to do. Well, we hadn't had no man to tell us what to do anyway. You couldn't tell us what to do in slavery, so we didn't really have no fight with you about that. That was the white woman's fight with her man, but we took it on. I want to be free. Ain't nobody gonna tell me what to do. And then women started having babies, what they call out of wedlock, and then that got to be okay too. Oh, it's all right. Once it got accepted by society, all of the rest of the people, then it was okay then to just have a baby. In fact, I don't even want him for nothing but to just have a baby. And then we started saying, I'm gonna be the mother and the father. All kind of nonsense. And so what happened was that movement, and there never was a sisterhood in the women's liberation movement between the black woman and the white woman.
The other part is to get rid of the environment and the ways and means for the head or the authority of that family to become and stay the authority and the head of that family, and that is to be the provider and the protector. Take away his means of providing, take away his means of protecting his family, and he no longer has any rights or any kind of power. So when you have done that, you have now undermined the glue that keeps a family together. Men don't have to be men anymore. So what's the best thing to do? Since you're giving so many favors to women, I might as well be a woman, or at least act like one, and therefore I'm no longer, as Dr. Francis Cress said, I'm no longer a threat.
If whites are involved in their genetic survival and they are threatened by black male masculinity, then it will occur, I have to reduce his masculinity. Yeah, we just recently had the president at Morehouse have to say the male students cannot wear high heel shoes and dresses and carry purses. So something is happening, again, within the total context of a system of racism and white supremacy. Neely Fuller, who wrote the textbook for victims of racism a number of years ago, in the late mid-70s, he used to say in the system, because he was the first person to talk about racism as a system, and he said that as the system of racism and white supremacy moves on, the system is going to have black men wearing dresses. Now, to hear that in the 70s, people said, oh, this is way out. And here we are. You see, there's some black pediatricians who are saying we are developing epidemic levels of the effeminization of young black males. So I say the pants sagging down is just a subconscious invitation for homosexuality. You see, it's revealing the buttocks. See, so the pants are getting lower and lower and lower. The next step is to step out of the pants altogether. And so you step out of the pants, you're going to put on a dress. The effeminization is an essential ingredient of white genetic survival, and the only thing that can prevent it is black people becoming conscious or becoming determined that this is not going to happen to them, because if the black men are destroyed, then the black people are gone, and we have a state of genocide. You see, it's like if I took an animal and put it in a cage, and so the animal couldn't grow well, and then I'll say, oh, look at this deformed animal. Do you see? I don't say, I made this creature deformed because of the conditions that I subjected him or her to. And the very fact that, in other words, the logic, in my view, if you felt that blacks were genetically, inherently inferior, you can give them the very best of conditions, and they would not be able to perform or function. You see, but the need to deprive, you know, at the same time that people are saying, oh, it's cold outside, make sure your dog is in. Make sure your dog gets all the nutrients for growth and development, because you're not fearful that the dog is going to take over the human beings. You see, but once you start depriving, systematic deprivation, it means, well, I must be afraid of these people maybe overtaking me if I allow them the same conditions, opportunities that I set forth for myself.
And so we have men who don't have the discipline to withstand the onslaught of the sexual energy that our women now carry. Most of our women don't get along with a black man unless he's laying down. Once y'all stand up, we going back to fighting, but we get along with you in the bed. And I tell them, I say, we have to learn how to get along with our man more than just in the bed. And there has never been a civilization where the children grew up to be successful when the man and the woman were at odds with each other, like the black man and black woman in America, okay? The fact that we can't get along is demonstrative by the situation, the condition of our children, especially our daughters. Our sons are acting like daughters, okay? They're not gay, they just have the feminine emotional mechanism because they've been around too many women, they've been raised by women and heard so much negative things about a black man, about being a black father.
Food, clothing, and shelter. Until you get food, clothing, and shelter, you will never get the attention of the masses. What made Marcus Garvey so successful? What made the Honorable Elijah Muhammad so successful? What made the Black Panther Party so successful? Now you're looking at three different ideologies. Mr. Garvey's Pan-Africanism, Elijah Muhammad's black religious nationalism, the black socialism of the Black Panther Party. Ideologically, they were different, but all three of them did one thing: provided for food, clothing, shelter, jobs, education, medical care. Every last one of those institutions attempted to build some sort of an independent functioning community with services. We ain't doing that today. We ain't doing that today. And that's why we don't have their attention. They say, why does the church continue to control black people when all they do is sell Jesus and collect money? Why? Because the church does have some services. It ain't sufficient, but they got more than the conscious organizations. The problem with the conscious organizations is all we do is run our damn mouth, but nobody's building. You follow me? We got 1,000,001 books at the bookstore. We got a book for every problem, but the problems are still here. See, we have been content with the information. The information is not enough. It is information plus action.